On the night of February 2nd, 2015, God came to me and asked me to be his spokesman for a very important mission on earth concerning the rosary. And I said, wait a minute, I don't say the rosary. He goes, I know. I said, whenever I go to a wake or a funeral or whatever, and they're going to say the rosary, I beat feet out of there as fast as possible. He goes, I know. I said, I don't read the Bible. He goes, I know. I said, and you're talking about me being your spokesman. What you want is somebody like Father Paul or Mike Simmons or one of the deacons. I said, you know how bad I am talking in front of people? He goes, yeah, I know. I said, then why, of all people on earth, would you want me? He said, for 3 reasons. First off, whenever you say the Our Father, you always say, thy will be done. Whenever people ask you where you're from, you say, right here. I was born right here in the heart of the Western wilderness. And for years you've been saying to me, well, I hope God tells me what my purpose in life is sometime soon so I can get it accomplished before I die. Well, this is your purpose in life. This is my will for you, to be my spokesman right here in the heart of the Western wilderness. I go, oh, okay. I said, do I get to perform any miracles? And he said, no. I know what miracle you want to perform. And the answer is no. If the person you want to perform this miracle with hasn't gone to church in years, never went to church for that matter. You guys used to go to Dunkin' Donuts instead of going to church on Sundays. And so therefore, it's a no. And because if you perform one miracle, you're going to want to, people are going to say, oh, if he performed a miracle on that guy, why can't he perform a miracle on me or my dad or whoever? So therefore, you're not going to get to do a miracle. I go, well, then why would I want to do this? I said, and I told you I don't say the rosary. I don't do any of this stuff. He goes, and I told you why I want you. And I said, okay, no, I don't want to do it. Get somebody else. He said, you sure? And I said, yeah. I said, there's too many other people in the world that could do this, and I'm definitely not your guy. Can I go back to sleep now? And he goes, okay, I guess so. I said, well, thanks, God. Maybe we'll talk some other time. Of course we'll talk some other time. God came back the next night, and we started all over again. And I'm going, why, of all people, once again, did you pick me? He goes, because you come highly recommended. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have the smarts enough to say who recommended me, but that's what he told me. And once again, I said, no, thank you. I don't want to talk in front of people. So, once again, he comes back the next night and he says, well, have you thought of it? About doing this for me? And I go, what is it again you want me to do? He said, all I want you to do is come up with a way to get as many souls out of purgatory as you can on November 2nd. November 2nd. Isn't that like All Souls Day where you say a rosary and you get a soul out of purgatory? And he said, yes. And I said, oh, okay. I'll think about it, and, get back to me, And so, of course, he comes back to me again the next night. I'm getting, okay, here's what I thought of. I was out of my mail route today, and I thought we could say the rosary at Holy Family every half hour, on the half hour, and we could possibly get 250 souls out of purgatory. He said, see how easy that was? All you had to do was say yes and think about it. I said, does this mean you're going to stop bothering me every night? He goes, yeah. He said, I said, well, you're very persistent. He goes, well, if you weren't so resistant, I wouldn't have to come back every night. I said, okay. Hey, I said, God, if you want to talk to me again, how about coming back during the day instead of waking me up? I said, I have to work in the morning. And it takes me a while to get back to sleep after talking to you. And he said, okay. So fast forward a month. So I'm getting ready to go to church on a Sunday morning. He goes, Joe. Oh, hi, God. He goes, I got something else I want you to do for me. He said, I want you to go down to talk to your friend Tom Dermody at Spalding Renewal Center and tell him what we've talked about so far. I said, okay. Tom Dermody at the time was the editor of the Catholic Post, and we had been friends for years, since we were both single at one time and we belonged to and met our wives at an organization called Catholic Alumni Club. Anyway, so I went down, I told him about the first four conversations, and I told him that God wanted me to talk to you and tell you to go talk to Monsignor Deptula, who was the Bishop Jenkins' right-hand man, and have him tell the bishop this about these stories. That God wants you, that God would like the bishop to declare November 2nd as a diocesan day of prayer and say that the people at Holy Family are going to do the rosary on that day, and they're going to get 250 souls out of purgatory that day. I would like every parish in the diocese to say the rosary that day, especially all the school-age children. Now, my friend Jerry Ferguson, who at the time was diocesan superintendent of Catholic schools, assistant superintendent of Catholic schools, said he could get all the school-age children to say the rosary, which would number about 16,500. And if we could get all the parishes within the diocese to say the rosary that night, we could get 25,000 souls out of purgatory in one day. The bishops would get together sometime during the summer, and Bishop Jenke would tell them what we were doing in the Diocese of Peoria, and together we could get 5 million souls out of purgatory in one day. The Pope would hear what the Catholic bishops in America were doing, and together, and he would make it a worldwide day of prayer, and we would get 10 million souls prayed out of purgatory in one day. I said, really? And he goes, when God was talking to me, I said, really? And he goes, yeah. I said, all you got to do is go down and talk to Tom Dermody. So I said, okay. And when I talked to Tom, and I said, Tom, we've been friends a long time, and when you came down to talk to me, you brought a notebook and a piece of paper. And he goes, something told me that you had something important to tell me. And I said, well, is this important enough? And he goes, yeah. He said, I'm going to be talking to Monsignor Deptula next week about the renovation of the cathedral, and I'll tell him all this. And I said, well, Tom, one more thing. God told me, if you do this, he will come. And I said, oh, now you're talking about my favorite movie, Field of Dreams. Does this mean what? My dad's going to come back and we're going to have a catch? And he goes, no, the Pope. And I said, the Pope's going to come and we're going to have a catch? He goes, no, a Pope, sometime in the future. It might be next year, it might be 10 years from now, it might be 100 years. But sometime in the future, the Pope is going to come and see where this whole thing started. And I said, okay, let me get this straight. I'm going to start all this? And he goes, yes. And I go, why me of all people? Once again, why me? And he said, because you are kind of like not a ramrod. You have your hand in about everything that goes on at Holy Family. So much so that you think that between you and Ed Mulbach, you do everything around the parish. So much so that you think that JMJ in front of on the steps going up to the altar don't necessarily stand for Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. You think it stands for Jesus, Mulbach, and Jochman. And I said, yeah, sorry about that. I should probably tone that down a little bit. He goes, yeah. And he said, so what you are like is like a rock dropped into a pool of believers. And as in a pool, things radiate radiate out from the center, ripple out. And he said, people up north, down south, out west, and out east are going to want to get on board. And I just kind of laughed at him. I said, that's pretty good, God. Can you think you can be a little bit more subtle than that? And he said, oh, did you like that? And I said, yes, I do. You know, you think about it. Up north, down south, out west, out east, sign of the cross, God's signature on all this. Well, that was basically the end of that for that day. And well, I never heard anything back from Tom Dermody about whether the bishop had heard about it or not. So I waited and I waited, and finally I talked to my friend Harry Williams one night in the Adoration Chapel, and he said what I should do is write the bishop a letter. So I did. I didn't hear back from him. And he said, now, when I talked to Harry again a couple of months later, he said, did you write it or did you type it? I go, well, I wrote it. He goes, well, maybe he couldn't read your writing. So why don't you try getting it typed out and send it in to him? So I sent it in to him. About a month later, Bishop got back to me. And in the opening paragraph of the letter, I had told him about my sister, Sister Janine Jochman, who had been a rector of Lyons Hall at the University of Notre Dame when he was a rector of one of the boys' dorms there, if he remembered her. And he wrote me back a letter and said, yeah, I remember her. He said, what I'm going to do is on November 2nd, I will pull out my beads and say a rosary for the holy souls. And if this, you do it at your parish, and if it takes, gets the ball rolling a little bit, maybe in a year or two, if it really gets going, then maybe I'll do a diocesan day of prayer. And I'm thinking, really? You're the bishop and you can't make one little, you know, make a diocesan day of prayer. So I was kind of crestfallen. And that was that. Fast forward to 2017. God comes back to me on a Thursday night and says, Joe, I got another idea for you. You've been doing a pretty good job the last couple of years of saying the rosary. But what I want you to do is I want you to step this up. I want you to say the rosary every day for the rest of your life. And when you die, all the souls that you prayed out of purgatory will be there at the gates waiting to welcome you into heaven. But if there's days when you don't feel like saying the rosary, or you're too tired, or I don't want to do it today, those souls that you didn't pray out will not be happy. let me put it a different way. You go into the Peoria Civic Center, basketball game, whatever it is, you walk out onto the middle of the court. You have, on one side, you have a lot of happy faces, and on the other side, you have a lot of unhappy faces. The happy faces are the faces of those who you prayed out of purgatory and are there to welcome you into heaven. The ones on the other side that you didn't pray for are not obviously happy. And if you have said more rosaries you've said more rosaries than not, then you'll be going to heaven. But if you haven't, there's more rosaries that you haven't said for the other people, other souls, then you'll go to purgatory and wait with them until someone in the future, however long that may be, will pray you out of purgatory. And I said, "Whoa, okay." Then 3 days after that, on a Sunday morning, he comes to me again and he says, "Joe, I want you to tell these 7 stories to people. And every time you do, tell them that God commands them to say the rosary every day for the rest of their life also." And I said, "Well, let's see. If I say the rosary every day for the rest of my life, I'm 65 right now, and 20 years from now, I probably get 7,300 souls out of purgatory." He goes, "That sounds good to me." And that was the end. Now I have to jump back a little bit. In 2015, in the summer, in July, I had gone with my family out to California to visit my sister, and every day we had been down at the beach swimming in the ocean. And the last day we were there, I was playing in the ocean and I got caught by a riptide. And instead of being like 25 yards from shore, I was 100 yards from shore and I was flailing. And I thought to myself, I actually said it out loud. I said, "God, you wanted me to do all this stuff for you and I'm going to drown here in the Pacific Ocean?" And my son looked out and he saw me flailing away at the water and he goes, "Dad, you want me to run down the beach and get the lifeguard?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he ran down the beach, got the lifeguard, who swam out to me, put one of those little rubber things under my arms, said, "Lay on your back and kick and I'll pull you into shore." And while he was doing so, he asked me my name, and then I asked him his, and he said his name was Danny Valenzuela, like the pitcher Fernando Valenzuela. And so he just kind of pulled me into shore, and my daughter's sitting on the beach crying like crazy, thinking I was going to drown. And one of my boys bought me a bottle of water, and he left. But I remember his last name was Valenzuela. So I went out home that night. I wrote it down on a piece of paper, and we left for Peoria the next day, and I got back and I wrote his name down on a piece of paper and stuck it to my mirror so I would not forget him. And every year since, on July 28th, I tried to get a hold of him in one way or another. I found out where he lived, what his phone number was, and we correspond at least 3 times a year, on July 28th, on Thanksgiving, of all times, and on my birthday. Later that year, well, that was August. In September of that year, I was on a Cursil, men's Cursil 1019, and I was a table leader. And at my table were 3 guys going through Cursil and a couple other gentlemen, and I told them my story. And so happened that one of the guys by the name of Patrick Payne had come from Vancouver, British Columbia, to be on our to participate because the waiting list in Vancouver was so long. Once again, fast forward to 2018, and he contacts me and says that he is going to produce a video or a documentary on religious occurrences around the world, and would it be okay for him to bring his film crew to Peoria to get my story? I said, sure. So in March of that year, he came. We talked for about 45 minutes, and in the process, I recalled my whole story of how things went with these 7 conversations with God. That is all. Thank you.